We're at halftime, and who might have imagined this to this extent? LSU 49, Oklahoma 14. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. Of course, this is the first of the two national semifinals with LSU off and running with over 500 yards, Jason, of total offense. As it stands right now, I see Joe Burrow is on a 21 of 27 day for 403 yards right now in 7 touchdown passes at halftime, and they've run for 94 yards. So 497 total offense for LSU. So we'll start right there in regards to what Oklahoma's done wrong, and then we'll talk about the losses on defense and how that's obviously affected this team.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mark. I think, it probably couldn't have went worse. I mean, I think from an Oklahoma perspective, as you mentioned, you could tell early and often they were LSU was going after Justin Broyles, who was Delaren Turner-Yell's replacement from a safety perspective. I think all of Justin Jefferson's touchdowns were on Broyles. I think he had, if I remember right, he had 4 first half touchdown receptions, either 4 or 5. I kind of lost count there, but I think it's pretty clear that a couple of things. I think it's clear just looking at the first half. LSU's offense, they are clearly the best individual, definitely the best individual unit in college football this year. I mean, you could certainly make a case for Clemson and Ohio State, how well they've played, but LSU's playing on another level right now. They're doing anything that they want to do offensively. I mean, you look at the 49 points that they've got on the board. You know, if they could score as many as they want, if they wanted to. But yeah, Oklahoma's not getting pressure with 4, or even if they're bringing 5 or 6. When they do get pressure, Joe Burrow's being elusive enough to get around the pocket, move around, scramble. A couple of things indicative early that I thought was really, really big. The third down play where Burrow scrambled to the sidelines and just kind of threw it up and got a reception. That was big. Trey Brown had an opportunity for maybe an interception, could be a pick 6. I think the score was 28-7 at that point. Could have had an opportunity for that as a bit of a game changer right there. They weren't able to make that play. And it's really just kind of a microcosm of the season for Oklahoma. Grinch, as good as they've been defensively, they've just not been able to get the turnovers that a Grinch defense needs. We talked about this a little bit before, that Oklahoma would certainly need to have a couple of turnovers and get off the field on third down. Oddly enough, I don't know that they've done terrible on third down, probably just because they haven't had a lot of opportunities. LSU's hasn't had a lot of third downs, and the ones that they've had have been pretty big plays. So I think it's certainly a lot of different things. It's a different animal. We talked also early that we thought that at least from my perspective, Oklahoma's going against an offense in LSU that was maybe the equivalent of what Alabama was last year. Looks as though that's probably not the case. LSU looks like they're a clear step ahead. But I think, it's hard to lose that many players on defense. You lost Kenneth Murray for a little bit early in the game. Then they lost Brendan Radley-Hiles to the targeting penalty there in the first half as well. So a lot to overcome, especially when you're outmanned and you're playing against one of the best offensives in the last 5 to 10 years in college football, probably.
So Oklahoma, just right out of the gate, it was a shaky performance. Within the first couple of plays, you could see that LSU was going to get pressure, and then they consistently did throughout the rest of the first half, right up the middle, pushing right in Jalen Hurts' face, and then he would have to be flushed, typically to his right. He would immediately, he only had a split second, and then he's rolling to his right because the pressure's right in his face, right out of the gate, and then we get the shaky punt. Mm-hmm. So bam, it sets up Joe Burrow and company with about 45 yards of offense right out of the gate with the bad punt. And then boom, 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 3 plays, and it's a touchdown to Justin Jefferson. And within those couple plays, there's a difference between seeing LSU receivers burn DBs on the Oklahoma side, or when you saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire get the ball for the first time, trying to think who it was. It was
I think it was Justin Broyles.
Yes, it was Broyles. Those are physical plays. Those are physical plays in which somebody's better than somebody else. But when you look at just blown coverages, now it wouldn't matter who was out there that was capable of throwing and catching the football. They're going to make those plays, like the last Thaddeus Moss touchdown when he was chipped by the defensive end and then he was let go. And there were several of those as well.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. I think you saw that certainly in the second quarter. I think Oklahoma was fairly competitive in its coverage early on in the first quarter, but then the second quarter, I think, took a little bit of its toll, and the game looks a bit. I think a lot. That's what. Excuse me. I think that's what many Oklahoma fans were a little bit apprehensive of, a little bit scared of. And then Grinch even said that there's a reason why we haven't played a lot of different people in the secondary this year. In the game, he seems to be a great kid. Justin Broyles, he's just not ready for this moment yet. You could tell. They to your point on the Clyde Edwards-Helaire truck. He wasn't ready for the physicality. Wasn't ready, for the receivers, just the physicality at the receiver position as well. I mean, you're talking about a couple, 2 or 3, probably 4, Thaddeus Moss is a tight end, but you have 3 to 4 receivers that are going to be playing NFL football, right? You got Chase and you got Thaddeus Moss, then you got Jefferson, and then Marshall is, an absolute star as well. So dealing with those four guys is tough with your guys, your best guys. But when you're not able to put your best 11 guys out there on the field, and you kind of lose, some of your mojo, some of your fire after that first quarter late first quarter, it just kind of goes downhill from here and from there. And then and they talked about it a lot on the broadcast, and it's pretty clear that Oklahoma's this year, they're not built to come back. We've talked several times about that. Oklahoma couldn't get in a big hole because they don't have Baker Mayfield, they don't have Kyler Murray. And I know this. You don't want to completely put the kid down. He's one of the classiest, best kids in college football. One of the winningest kids in college football, but he's not at the same level. And part of it is his offensive line not giving him a lot of time to look downfield and find plays down the field. But I think I don't have the stats right in front of me. 4 for 18, I think, is what I saw with the one interception. You can tell the difference. Even those long passes, the long pass early on to CeeDee Lamb wasn't a great pass. He just made a great catch against the safety for LSU. And and then he hasn't made a lot of good passes, honestly. Obviously that's kind of a given going 4 for 18, but he's been inaccurate a bit in the pocket as well. So I think it's unfortunately for Oklahoma, it's been a bit of a perfect storm in a negative way.
Clemson alum 98 here. One team has proven it can play with the SEC. Nobody else really. I don't necessarily know that I understand that comment just because they just started playing one game. We've only got one game in the books, and that's not even in the books, but it might as well be. But we've only played an Oklahoma team against LSU. So I don't know exactly who you're referring to because Clemson has not played anybody decent in the SEC this year. So I have absolutely no validity backing that comment unless we're talking about history. And then if we want to talk about history, we can mention all sorts of teams that can play with the SEC. So I don't know what that has anything to do with anything. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So anyway, Man, I just it would still not be a game, but man, you miss your best safety, you miss your sack leader, and then with that stupid play that Radley Hiles made, targeting Edwards-Helaire and knocking him out of the game. It still wouldn't be a game, but it's just too bad to see Oklahoma out there without three of its. Probably Kenneth Murray's the best player on the defense. Probably if their top 5 players on defense are gone.
Oh yeah,
that's rough.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, and I think you're right. Maybe it'd have been a little bit more competitive of a game if that was the case. But yeah, it still would be pretty comparable in terms of the score, you would think. And I think the one thing that you think about on the back half of this game is, what does this mean for Oklahoma in terms of their playoff reputation? Going forward, they'll be 0-4. 2 of the 4 games. I mean, you can even say 3 of the 4 games they lost by 20 to LSU. I believe this would have been Baker Mayfield's sophomore year at Oklahoma. I believe it was a 37-17 score. So, they've lost 3 of the 4, I guess you could say, in convincing fashion. 2 of the 4, definitely. If you call the 11-point game convincing last year, it's it's debatable, I guess. But what does this mean for Oklahoma from a playoff perspective? Just kind of thinking about their reputation. Of course, historically, Oklahoma has been one of those teams. They've received the benefit of the doubt a lot of times when it's been a battle between 2 teams, even going as far back as when Oklahoma played LSU in 2003 season. In that championship game, they lost 35-7 to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game, but they were, and that was the BCS era, but they were so far ahead that they still was able to play in that game, in that championship game. Kind of similarly the next year when Oklahoma played USC in that national championship game and got beat. I think there was some thoughts that maybe Miami should have been in that game or could have been in that game, and then then you go. I think it was 2008 season where that was the season where Oklahoma lost to Colt McCoy in Texas in the Red River Shootout, 45-35, I believe was the score in that game. And then Texas loses to Texas Tech in that dramatic loss. And then, Oklahoma gets the benefit of the doubt being a higher ranked team. And then, certainly this year there was not really any, as we talked about this in the kind of the pregame, there wasn't really a close consideration besides Oklahoma. They were the clear number 4. I mean, you couldn't really even make an argument for another team. You're really at that point being the only one-loss, conference champion. So, so you think about these things. They've got the benefit of the doubt through the years. What does that look like going forward from a committee's perspective? Certainly, if they're the clear cut, they're going to make the playoffs. But if you get into a conversation, whether it's between Oklahoma and another team or a couple of teams, I think after this, these things kind of take their toll, and I think you'll probably see maybe a different conversation in those deliberations when they're deciding do we want to. I know it's not about who you want to see, it's who's most deserving, but at the same time, you see Oklahoma go 0-4. Some of these are in blowout fashion. Do you want to give maybe a Pac-12 team an opportunity? As I don't believe they've, since Oregon made the playoffs a few years ago. I think that they've been. Washington. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about Washington. Yeah. So kind of the same thing, but it has been a couple of years since the Pac-12 has gotten someone in. Does that team get more of the benefit of the doubt versus an Oklahoma or Big 12 team?
Yeah, so I would think and hope going forward that any committee selecting worthy teams for a particular year would not base that on past experience, but it's only human nature for that to creep in. But every season should be judged, and every team should be judged and evaluated based on the performance that season, and not thinking, oh, what happened in 2015? What happened in 2019? What happened whenever? But we all tend to do that. And Oklahoma, you could almost in a sense, whether you want to judge the Alabama loss last year versus the Clemson loss in 2015. For me, the Clemson game was a little bit closer because I think that was a 1-point game at halftime.
It was. You're right.
Clemson. So they out of the gate, they competed even for a half, and then it got away from them in the third quarter rather than getting blown out of the gate and then us wondering how much of the comeback was valid. But yeah, it's and for any Big 12 fans that are embarrassed or mad at Oklahoma, well, your program, your team needs to do something about it, because this has been the program that has been the program, and it's not even close, since certainly 2009, since Texas went to that national championship game. This program has owned the conference.
Yeah, no, you're right. They absolutely have. And, it's, I think, 4 consecutive Big 12 championships, I think, certainly speak to that. But yeah, I think it's a conversation that's probably going to happen after next year. Does, whether it's Oklahoma or whether it's the Big 12 itself, we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, about in terms of, conference, do you essentially root for your conference affiliation, or how do you feel? Do you in the bowl games? And I think it's one of those things, like, these things will take a little bit of a toll on the conference in itself, and in the playoffs. And it's also one of those things that's an interesting discussion, as happens every year, particularly this year. Around the playoff time, is the kind of thought of expansion. Do they go to 8, or do they stay at 4? Do they go at 8? And I think a couple of years ago I was pretty strong on the expansion front. No more than 8. Me and Mike Laval, Tony Syracuse, all of our folks there at Left, we had a lot of spirited discussions on that. And I think over the last year, I've got to the point where I think right now, until we see something different, in terms of the landscape of college football, I think a 4 is perfect. I don't know that that we need to get more than 4, because as you look at it, last year every game was a blowout in the playoffs. We had I think that, though, oddly enough, the Oklahoma-Alabama game was the closest game of any of the playoff games last year. I think it was Clemson beat Notre Dame like 30-3, if I remember right. And then, of course, we know that the Clemson-Alabama game was a blowout as well. So I think when you think of that, it's hard to imagine getting to a 8-team playoff format, and seeing the games, how the games have unfolded here. So I think everybody always, it's one of those things everyone wants more, but I think until you get to a point where it's needed rather than wanted, I think we got a pretty great system right now.
I understand that that point of view. Mine comes from the other perspective, that this has been the first season out of 6 playoff years in which there has not been a legitimate argument over who should be in the playoff. This is the first year where it's been clear cut. 3 undefeateds, 1 with a loss as a conference champion. No other conference had a champion with only 1 loss. Therefore, it's clear cut 1 through 4. And it just worked out for the committee. A number of things could have happened the final weekend that would have muddied the waters considerably, but they didn't. So it was clear cut this year. My opinion on the 8 teams comes from a different perspective. So I understand we've seen blowouts and non-competitive games for the most part through these 6 playoffs. But my perspective is that every year I can give a compelling argument, an easy argument, as to teams being left out of the playoff that had just as good a resumes and track records and than teams that were selected. Every year
Yeah.
that happened except for this year. The teams have been left out that had just as good a resumes as the teams that made the playoff.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point, Mark. Absolutely. That's a fair point. I mean, I just, the argument against the playoffs has always been that college football has the best regular season of any sport, collegiate, professionally. How does that change that if you have 8 teams? A team like Oklahoma, a team like LSU, a team like Ohio State, Clemson. They most certainly, any of those would get in with a 1 loss, maybe even 2 losses. But on the other end of it is certainly intriguing to, as we always clamor for more, we always want something different. What would that look like? It's always a interesting thought. How do you play into the bowl games with that? I'm interested on your thoughts as well. I hate the idea. I absolutely hate the idea of a team hosting a playoff game on their own home field. I see that does happen in some conference championships. I hate it. I think it just gives an unfair advantage to the to those teams. So how you're able to to include all of the bowl games in that would be interesting. But I think it's one of those things where we can go back and forth all day on this. I think it's going to happen. I mean, I think it's just a matter of when. I think I wouldn't be surprised within the next 10 years if it happened. Maybe not as early as 5 years, but certainly within the next 10 years. I think it's something that we will probably see, like it or not.
Well, once these bowl games were identified with and affiliated with the playoffs, they lost their identity anyway. The Rose Bowl is no longer the Rose Bowl when it's a playoff game. The Rose Bowl was always a game that was played between the Big Ten champion and the Pac-12 champion. And just because we call it the Rose Bowl and it's played at the Rose Bowl, it's a college football playoff game. This is a college football playoff game. We just call it the Peach Bowl. Sure. I don't even know why. I don't even know why it's called the Peach Bowl. Does it really matter that it's called the Peach Bowl?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter.
No, not at all.
The other one's the Fiesta Bowl.
That's right.
But it's just the other semifinal game.
Yep.
So I find it interesting that Frank Breeze is mentioning that Clemson has a huge chip on its shoulder and looks dangerous. Maybe they do. And if they do, Dabo Swinney is absolutely a genius, because if he's convincing them, as Frank says, that the media has been doubting them all along, when every analyst I've seen has picked them to win the game against Ohio State, I don't know who's doubting them. I haven't seen anybody doubting them, but Dabo seems to be convincing people that they're being doubted, but these people don't actually exist. They're mythical people that are doubting them. I don't know where they are.
Yeah, no, it's weird. I think Dabo has done an excellent job at kind of creating an inferiority complex within that team, within just the program in itself. A few weeks ago, he kind of went on the tirade around, no one wants them in the playoffs, and no one wants to see them, win the national championship game again, and they have to be perfect in order to make the playoffs. And I don't think that's necessarily indicative of Clemson from a program perspective. I think that's more indicative of how bad the ACC has been this year and over the last couple of years. I think. And this is just an excellent matchup. And we actually wrote up a preview for this on Last Word on College Football that went out yesterday. And it's so intriguing. I think LSU has certainly made their case to be the top team in the country. But I think I think those two, Clemson and Ohio State, is both of those teams can make that argument as well. You have, I think, Oklahoma fans, kind of worry about Clemson from the aspect of they've won 28 straight. They win 2 in a row here to end the year. That's 30 in a row. How much does this keep going? Can they can they get close to that 47-game win streak that Oklahoma had, back in the 50s there? And they're if they're able to win 2 games this year, then they would be looking at that in 2021 if they're able to keep the ball rolling. And then you look at Ohio State. What a fantastic job Ryan Day has done. With them. I believe he's 16-0. With the interim coaching that he did last year, and then this year, and we haven't talked about this in terms of I don't hear this narrative being spoken about nationally in terms of you always hear about Joe Burrow and rightfully so, but Justin Fields has had one of the most efficient individual seasons that I can ever remember in college football. 40 touchdowns and 1 interception for the amount of times that he handles the ball, he throws the football, and it's just incredible the season that he's had for Ohio State, and the matchups within the matchup in that game is certainly intriguing. How does Clemson, from an offensive line perspective, how do they game plan for Chase Young? I know Fields had the injury a couple of games ago, and he even mentioned in some of the press conference that I saw that it's not as far along in terms of feeling 100% as he would expect. Clemson, losing all of those players, they still have the number 1 ranked defense in the country. So I think that game is going to be. I hope we get one competitive game, but it looks it's hard to imagine either one of those teams blowing out the other.
It is hard to imagine, but we've seen stranger things, so I would not be totally shocked. And LSU's gunning for another touchdown here. And, I guess the only thing we can guess on is how high is the score going to go, and how long is Joe Burrow and some other key players, how long are they going to play, I guess, in this game?
Yeah, I think the only thing from an Oklahoma perspective that you might be interested in, does the heir apparent at Oklahoma is Spencer Rattler. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's not technically he's not the second team quarterback right now, but in pretty much everybody's minds, he is. He's going to be the guy next year as a redshirt freshman. So I would like to see, especially as depending on how the rest of this game goes, certainly if Oklahoma is somehow able to get a couple of stops and they get a couple of scores, then certainly you probably don't take Hurts out. But I think given the way it's going right now, if LSU gets a score, maybe they get a stop on Oklahoma's next drive, you'd like to see Rattler play some in this game just to get him some experience in a big time atmosphere like this. It'll be interesting to see how Riley plays that. I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it, but I think that would be certainly important for like his maturation into 2020.
I think somebody in the live chat is comparing this game to the Ohio State loss against Clemson 31-0 in 2016, and certainly Ohio State was dominated from an offensive standpoint in that game, but that game was 10-0 with a couple minutes left in the first half. So it was a much more competitive game from that standpoint. It just kind of like slowly drifted away into a blowout. Mike Tbow, speaking to what you talked about earlier, Jason, that the mindset's going to be, you would think that especially a 2-loss non-SEC champion is going to get the nod the more we see these kind of results. I wouldn't necessarily put the Big Ten in that category, but certainly the SEC you would think would get some favor there. Jason, regardless of what the score is, I don't want to keep you from the game, so certainly you can jump off here, and I, if anything, can enjoy a pizza without being too on the edge of my seat during the second half, just taking in whatever narrative we can find of this game in the second half, and anticipating that we have a decent game in the other semifinal, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks for stopping by, Jason. We appreciate that, first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed it, Mark.
All right, folks. We'll be back sometime later tonight, and hopefully we'll have a good game to match discuss, but we'll talk about this LSU-Oklahoma game, and then Ohio State-Clemson, of course, and then set you up for the matchup in the national championship game, which will be LSU against Ohio State or Clemson. So we'll see everybody later tonight.